police sirens were still echoing across my own property when Karen strutted up to the squad car, clipboard in hand, demanding they arrest me for trespassing on HOA common land. I'm standing there in my work boots on the dusty gravel driveway of the ranch I inherited from my grandfather, watching two confused deputies trying to figure out why this perfectly coiffed blonde woman with a white Escalade covered in HOA enforcement decals is pointing at me like I'm some kind of criminal. The smell of sagebrush mixed with Karen's overpowering perfume, the kind that probably costs more than most people's car payments. Every time she gestured dramatically, her high heels crunched on the scattered gravel from her dramatic entrance, like some kind of demented percussion section. The lead deputy frowned at his tablet, checking property records, then looked back at Karen with the expression you'd give someone who just told you the moon was made of cheese. What would you do if someone called the cops on you, on your own land? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet your HOA has its own Karen. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name's Jake Morrison, and 3 months ago I was just another burned-out city guy going through the world's messiest divorce. At 52, I figured it was time to come home to the 40-acre ranch in Colorado that my grandfather left me. The same spread where I'd spent every summer as a kid, learning to fix fences and feed chickens. Every morning I'd sit on that wraparound porch with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Rockies orange and gold, thinking about how Grandpa always said this land would heal whatever was broken in a man. The screen door still had that familiar squeak that would drive city folks crazy, but sounded like home to me. Walking into the old barn, breathing in that mix of ancient leather and sweet hay, I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years of corporate life: peace. Here's what Karen didn't know about me. I'd built the largest HOA management company in the country. Revenge Tech Solutions. Yeah, I named it that on purpose. Manages 847 homeowner associations across 23 states. I've seen every dirty trick, every power play, every petty tyrant who thinks a clipboard makes them Napoleon. But I was done with all that. I wanted simple, I wanted quiet, I wanted to fix up Grandpa's 1,920s farmhouse and maybe raise a few horses. Enter Karen Mitchell. Karen was the self-appointed queen of Pine Ridge Estates, the fancy development that had sprouted up next to my ranch about 5 years back. Picture every HOA horror story you've ever heard, then give it a perfectly styled blonde bob, a white Escalade with the vanity plate, HOA boss, and the kind of fake sweet voice that could make sugar taste bitter. She'd convinced the county to rezone our area as mixed residential/commercial, which was fancy talk for Karen wants to control everything she can see. For 5 years, she'd been systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Elderly folks, single mothers, anyone who dared to paint their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. My first clue that trouble was coming? I arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday morning to find Karen's crew ripping out my grandfather's hand-carved fence posts, the ones that had marked our property line since 1924. "Honey, I know this is hard," she said, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor, "but progress waits for no one." "Ma'am, that fence has been there since 1924. She smiled that smile, you know the one, where the lips move but the eyes stay cold. "Well, it's 2025 now, sweetie. County regulations require a 20-foot buffer zone between agricultural and residential properties." She waved official-looking documents that probably cost her more in legal fees than most people make in 6 months. The real kicker? Karen had been eyeing my ranch for years, planning some luxury development expansion that would turn Grandpa's legacy into another soulless subdivision. What I didn't realize yet was that Karen had been playing this game with my neighbors too. Sweet Mrs. Chen, who'd lived here for 40 years and made the world's best dumplings, was getting harassed about her non-conforming garden vegetables. Mr. Peterson, a Vietnam vet whose only crime was parking his RV in his own driveway, was facing daily fines for visual blight. Karen's method was simple. Use HOA rules, like weapons, target anyone different, and collect fees to fund her personal legal wars disguised as community improvement. She had connections. Her brother-in-law was the county commissioner, and she wasn't shy about using them. Standing there watching strangers destroy my family's heritage, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to rebuild that fence. Every single post. Just didn't know Karen was about to declare war on the one person in America who actually knew how to fight back. 2 weeks later, I was up on my barn roof, at sunrise, replacing shingles that had seen better decades. When I heard the sound that would become the soundtrack to my summer, Karen's high heels clicking across gravel like an angry metronome. She arrived with a county inspector in tow, a nervous little guy who kept glancing at her like a dog waiting for treats. In her manicured hands, she clutched a stack of papers, thick enough to stop a bullet. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, voice dripping with false concern, "I'm afraid we have a problem." I climbed down the ladder, wiping sawdust off my hands. "What kind of problem?" "Unpermitted structures," she announced, like she was reading a death sentence. The inspector, whose name tag read Bob, but whose soul belonged to Karen, nodded along like a bobblehead. "This barn renovation, the house painting, even that new fence, all require permits and impact fees." I looked around at my property, the same buildings that had stood here since before Karen was born. Impact fees for what? "Disturbing the residential character of the neighborhood," Bob mumbled, not making eye contact. "That'll be $15,000. Here's where most people would panic. Here's where Karen expected me to fold. Instead, I smiled and said the words that would haunt her dreams. "I'll need to see the documentation for that." That evening, after they left with their stop work order, I fired up my laptop and did what I do best. I researched. See, there's a beautiful thing about county records. They're all online now, searchable, and they tell stories that corrupt officials really don't want you to read. First discovery: Karen's precious Pine Ridge estates had violated wetlands protection laws when they built their fancy clubhouse. The natural spring that runs through my property, it also runs through theirs, and they'd never filed the proper environmental impact reports. But here's the real kicker, and this is something every homeowner should know. I pulled up the survey records and found that Karen's decorative fence actually encroached 3 feet onto my property. In legal terms, that's called adverse possession, and it can bite you in ways you never imagined. Here's your knowledge nugget. Always check if your neighbor's permits were actually approved before you assume they know what they're talking about. County websites show everything, and ignorance of public records is not bliss. I filed a formal complaint with the EPA about the wetlands violation and sent a certified letter to Karen about her fence encroachment. Professional, polite, and absolutely devastating. The next morning, she stormed across my property like a tornado in designer jeans. "You think you're clever, don't you, cowboy?" She spat, using cowboy like it was a curse word. "Just following proper procedures, ma'am." Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against my porch railing like an angry woodpecker. "I know people in county government. I can make your life very difficult." "I'm sure you can," I said, sipping my coffee. What I didn't say was that I knew people too, just not the kind she was thinking of. That's when she played her next card, the threat to have my ranch declared an agricultural nuisance. Apparently, the smell of hay and the sound of my rooster violated the peaceful enjoyment of her HOA members. But Karen made a crucial mistake that week. She got impatient. I woke up Thursday morning to find professional surveyor stakes scattered across my property like some kind of bizarre lawn ornament. She'd hired a $3,000 boundary survey without permission, trying to create a property line dispute where none existed. And the mini twist? Her expensive surveyor had missed the original survey monument, a concrete marker buried near the old oak tree that definitively proved the property lines. It was like watching someone pay a fortune to prove themselves wrong. Mrs. Chen appeared at my door that afternoon with a thermos of green tea and a story that made my blood boil. Karen had been systematically targeting neighbors who didn't fit her suburban fantasy. Illegal HOA fees for landscaping violations when people planted vegetables instead of ornamental grass, threatening liens on houses for parking boats in their own driveways. "She calls herself the neighborhood protector," Mrs. Chan said, settling into my porch swing. "But she's more like a neighborhood infection." 3 other neighbors stopped by over the next few days, each with their own Karen horror story. The pattern was clear. She targeted anyone who questioned her authority, anyone who looked different, anyone who dared to live their lives without asking permission. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore. I was fighting for my community. And Karen had no idea she'd just picked a fight with someone who'd spent 15 years learning exactly how to take down people like her. Week 4 brought what I like to call the Karen Blitz, a coordinated assault of bureaucratic terrorism that would have made any normal person surrender. I came home from the feed store to find a stack of violation notices rubber-banded to my door, so thick it made a satisfying thud when it hit my kitchen table. 12 separate code violations, each more ridiculous than the last. My 3 chickens, Henrietta, Cluck Norris, and the hen Solo, were suddenly commercial livestock, despite being pets who probably cost me more in organic feed than they'd ever produce in eggs. The barn that had sheltered horses since the Coolidge administration was now an unpermitted commercial structure. Even my grandfather's solar panels, installed in 2019, were somehow a visual blight incompatible with residential aesthetics. Karen's strategy was surgical in its pettiness. She scheduled every inspection during my work hours. Somehow she'd figured out my routine, probably from watching me like some suburban stalker. Each time she brought a different inspector, making sure no one could develop a consistent understanding of the actual regulations. "You can see how this agricultural mess damages our property values," she told Inspector 4, a guy named Dave who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The final insult? She'd hired a drone operator to photograph my ranch from above, claiming it was for documentation purposes. I watched that thing buzzing around my property like a mechanical vulture, and I'll admit, for a moment, I wanted to break out Grandpa's old shotgun and teach it some manners. But patience is a virtue, especially when you're planning someone's downfall. That weekend, I did what any reasonable HOA management expert would do. I researched the living hell out of Karen Mitchell and her little kingdom. Here's a knowledge nugget that saved my bacon. Most HOAs are required to register as corporations with the state. It's not optional, it's law. So I pulled up Colorado's business registry and started digging. Guess what I found? Karen's Pine Ridge Estates HOA had never filed proper incorporation papers. For 5 years, she'd been collecting fees and issuing fines from what was essentially a neighborhood book club with delusions of grandeur. The takeaway? Check your state's business registry before you pay another dime in HOA fees. Your HOA might not even be legally valid. But wait, it gets better. Karen had been collecting management fees without required state registration, which in Colorado makes her an unlicensed business operator. Every fine she'd issued, every fee she'd collected, every power play she'd made, all potentially illegal. I spent Sunday cross-referencing her tactics with fraud cases I'd handled through my own company. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was following a playbook I'd seen before. The same pattern of targeting, the same escalation strategies, the same financial irregularities. Monday night, I hosted what I called a ranch barbecue for the neighbors. Really, it was an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a community cookout. Mrs. Chen brought her famous dumplings, little pockets of heaven that made the whole enterprise feel like a cultural exchange program. As the sun set behind the mountains and the smell of mesquite smoke mixed with the evening air, people started talking. "That woman moved here and declared herself queen," Mrs. Chen said, settling into a lawn chair with a plate balanced on her lap. 3 other families shared their stories. Karen's targeting wasn't random, it was strategic. Elderly folks who might not fight back, single mothers who couldn't afford lawyers, veterans who just wanted to be left alone. Anyone who looked different, sounded different, or dared to question her authority. But here's where Karen made her next mistake. She heard about my barbecue. Tuesday morning, I found a cease and desist letter taped to my door, threatening $500 per day fines for operating an unpermitted commercial gathering. According to Queen Karen, having neighbors over for burgers constituted a business violation. Continued violations will result in lien placement and forced sale of property, the letter warned, in language that sounded like it came from a legal thriller written by someone who'd never actually seen the inside of a law school. She also posted 47 messages on the HOA Facebook page about dangerous elements infiltrating the neighborhood. Apparently, I was now a disruptive influence whose anti-community behavior patterns threatened their way of life. The mini twist came Thursday morning when I discovered Karen had been doing more than just watching. She'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, thinking she'd find some skeleton in my closet she could use as leverage. The PI report landed in my mailbox by mistake, addressed to Pine Ridge HOA Management at my ranch address. Karen had been using my address for her official correspondence, probably hoping to intercept my mail. Reading that report was like watching someone hand me a loaded gun. It contained my business information, my divorce details, even photos of my daily routine. But here's the beautiful part. Karen didn't understand what she'd found. The report mentioned HOA management company, but Karen thought that meant I managed one small HOA somewhere. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the man who ran the largest HOA management operation in the country. I was about to teach her the difference between playing office and playing for keeps. Week 6 brought Karen's nuclear option, and I mean that literally. She filed for an emergency restraining order against me, claiming I posed an immediate threat to neighborhood safety. I found out when the sheriff's deputy knocked on my door at 6 a.m. with a court summons. According to the paperwork, I was apparently planning to turn my ranch into a commercial cattle operation that would endanger local children. Never mind that my most dangerous livestock consisted of 2 aging horses named Buttercup and Daisy, who spent most of their time napping in the shade. The court documents read like a horror novel written by someone who'd never left suburbia. Karen claimed I'd brandished farming tools threateningly during our encounters. The weapon in question? My grandfather's antique plow, which I'd been cleaning up for display in the barn. She'd brought 3 HOA board members as witnesses to my alleged intimidation tactics. These were the same people who probably called animal control if they saw a raccoon. Subject displays concerning antisocial behavior patterns consistent with rural extremist ideology, read one particularly creative paragraph. Apparently, wanting to live quietly on my own land made me a domestic terrorist. Here's a knowledge nugget that saved me thousands in legal fees. Emergency restraining orders require proof of immediate credible threat, not just someone's paranoid fantasies. The standard is clear and present danger, not, I don't like my neighbor's lifestyle choices. The takeaway? Know your rights before someone tries to weaponize the court system against you. I showed up to court with my divorce attorney Marcus, a guy who'd seen enough bitter custody battles to recognize crazy when it walked into his office. We brought property deeds dating back a century, character references from everyone who mattered in town, and a timeline of Karen's escalating harassment. The old documents crackled like autumn leaves as we laid them out for the judge. Proof that my family had been good neighbors for 3 generations before Karen even knew Colorado existed. Mitchell, Judge Rodriguez said, peering over his glasses like a disapproving grandfather, a plow is not a weapon. Karen tried to interrupt, hands waving like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. Your Honor, you don't understand the psychological impact. Ma'am, I'm going to stop you right there, the judge continued. Perhaps you should focus on actual HOA duties instead of manufacturing drama. The restraining order was denied, Karen was ordered to pay my court costs, and I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I just won the lottery. But Karen's humiliation had consequences. She stormed out of the courthouse muttering about appeals and corrupt judges, then spent the rest of the day flooding the HOA Facebook page with 47 separate posts about the persecution of community leaders by the deep state judicial system. That night, she called an emergency HOA board meeting to address ongoing threats to community safety. The agenda, which somehow found its way to my mailbox, included a special assessment on all residents for a legal defense fund to fight my intimidation campaign. The beautiful thing about Karen's escalation pattern was how predictable it made her. I'd seen this exact behavior in dozens of fraud cases. When cornered, petty tyrants always double down. They can't help themselves. While Karen was busy having her public meltdown, I was quietly building a case that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The mini twist came when I started receiving mail that wasn't meant for me. Karen had been using my ranch address for HOA business correspondence, probably hoping to intercept anything that might expose her schemes. One envelope contained bank statements that made my blood run cold. The Pine Ridge HOA had $180,000, 0 cents, missing from their reserve account. Karen had been paying herself $8,000, 0 cents per month, in management fees that had never been voted on by residents. Another envelope held insurance claims for hail damage that never happened, contractor invoices for work that was never done, and legal bills for fighting violations she'd created herself. The smell of her perfume still lingered on some of the documents, like she'd been handling evidence of her own crimes right before mailing them. But the smoking gun was a set of architectural plans for Pine Ridge Resort Community, showing my ranch converted into a golf course with luxury condos where Mrs. Chen's house currently stood. Karen hadn't been protecting her neighborhood, she'd been systematically destroying it to make room for her development dreams. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer and my laptop, finally understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA overreach. This was organized fraud, targeting vulnerable neighbors, funded by theft from the very people Karen claimed to represent. Mrs. Chen appeared with a plate of cookies and her usual perfect timing. "You look like a man with heavy thoughts," she said. "Just figuring out how deep this rabbit hole goes," I replied. She settled into the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. Deep enough to bury someone, I'd imagine. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore. I was the only thing standing between Karen and the complete destruction of everything my neighbors had worked their whole lives to build. Time to stop playing defense and start playing for keeps. The morning everything changed started like any other, until I opened an envelope that wasn't supposed to exist. It was addressed to Pine Ridge HOA Management at my ranch, another piece of Karen's mail that had found its way to the wrong address. But this wasn't just another contractor invoice or legal bill. This was a bank statement that made me understand exactly what Karen Mitchell really was. $180,000, gone. Not missing, not misplaced, stolen. For 5 years, Karen had been systematically looting the HOA reserve fund like a financial vampire. $8,000 per month in management fees that no board had ever approved. $45,000 for emergency roof repair on a clubhouse that had been re-roofed 6 months earlier. $25,000 in legal bills fighting code violations she'd created herself. But the insurance claims were the real masterpiece of fraud: hail damage from storms that never happened, flood damage from pipes that never burst, wind damage from hurricanes in Colorado. Karen had turned weather reports into a personal ATM. I spread the documents across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle, each one revealing another layer of systematic theft. The smell of Karen's perfume clung to some of the papers, evidence that she'd been handling these documents personally, probably in her home office, thinking she was untouchable. The real estate angle hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen's LLC had purchased 3 foreclosed homes in the HOA at below market prices, homes that had been foreclosed because of the illegal fines and fees she'd imposed on their owners. She wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying lives to create buying opportunities for herself. Glossy development brochures slipped out of one envelope, showing architectural renderings of Pine Ridge Resort community. My grandfather's ranch was featured prominently, transformed into a golf course with luxury condos dotting the landscape where Mrs. Chen's vegetable garden currently grew. Karen had already scheduled investor meetings, already had construction contracts drawn up with her brother-in-law's company, already planned the complete destruction of our community to build her suburban paradise. And then it hit me. The moment of perfect, beautiful clarity that comes when all the pieces finally click into place. I wasn't just looking at HOA harassment, I was looking at textbook organized fraud, the kind I'd prosecuted 47 times across 23 states. Karen was running the exact same playbook I'd seen destroy communities from Phoenix to Miami. The targeting of elderly residents, the manufactured violations, the illegal fee structure, the shell companies, the real estate manipulation. Every dirty trick in the HOA fraud handbook executed with the precision of someone who'd done this before. I pulled up my laptop and started cross-referencing Karen's previous addresses. Arizona, Nevada. 2 other states where she'd lived just long enough to completely transform rural communities into luxury developments. "I've sent people to prison for less than this," I said to my empty kitchen, finally understanding the scope of what I was dealing with. But here's the beautiful part. Karen had no idea who she was messing with. Her private investigator's report mentioned HOA Management Company, but she thought that meant I managed one small subdivision somewhere. She had no clue. She just declared war on the person who literally wrote the book on detecting HOA fraud. This wasn't about my ranch anymore. This was about justice for Mrs. Chen, for Mr. Peterson, for every family Karen had targeted and destroyed in her quest to play real estate mogul with other people's lives. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Sarah, it's Jake. Remember how you said retirement was boring? I've got a case that's going to make your FBI days look like kindergarten. Time to stop playing the confused rancher and start playing the game I'd been winning for 15 years. Sarah Chen Rodriguez arrived at my ranch 3 days later, driving a Tesla and carrying enough forensic accounting equipment to audit a small country. Former FBI white-collar crime specialist, current forensic accountant, and my business partner in more takedowns than I could count. HOA embezzlement, she said, stepping out of her car with a grin that could cut glass. That's my favorite kind of takedown. It's like Christmas morning for someone who gets excited about spreadsheet irregularities. We set up our war room in Grandpa's barn, the smell of old hay mixing with the fresh ink from our high-speed printer. Within hours, the rustic space looked like something between CSI Financial Crimes and a Martha Stewart fever dream. High-tech equipment surrounded by hand-hewn beams and antique horse tack. My divorce attorney Marcus showed up that evening with a cooler full of beer and a predatory smile. Pro bono case with media potential? Don't mind if I do. This is going to be more fun than that custody battle where the guy tried to hide assets in cryptocurrency. Mrs. Chen became our unofficial intelligence coordinator, bringing homemade dumplings and 40 years' worth of neighborhood gossip that proved more valuable than any private investigator could provide. That woman moved here and declared herself queen, she said, settling into a folding chair with a legal pad. But queens can fall, especially when they forget to wear clothes to their own execution. Sarah spread Karen's financial documents across a folding table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Ladies and gentlemen, let me educate you about embezzlement red flags. First rule, HOA presidents cannot pay themselves without board votes. When they do, it's called theft. She pointed to line items that would make a seasoned accountant weep. Always demand to see line-digit budgets. If your HOA president says, "Trust me," that's when you should definitely not trust them. Here's your knowledge nugget. HOA members have legal rights to inspect financial records, demand them in writing, and if they refuse, that's probable cause for an audit. The takeaway? Transparency isn't optional in legitimate organizations. Marcus outlined our multi-pronged legal strategy like a general planning D-Day. We're going civil, criminal, and regulatory. Bar complaints against her attorney for participating in fraud. Qui tam lawsuit under state HOA fraud statutes. FBI referral for interstate wire fraud? What's a qui tam lawsuit? Mrs. Chen asked, pen poised over her notepad. It means private citizens can prosecute fraud on behalf of the state and keep a percentage of recovered damages, Marcus explained. Think of it as legal bounty hunting. I fired up my HOA management software to show the neighbors what legitimate governance actually looks like. The laptop screens glowed like campfires in the barn's golden evening light as I demonstrated proper financial controls, democratic decision-making, and transparent reporting. We never knew HOAs could actually work for residents, said Tom Peterson, the Vietnam vet who'd been getting harassed about his RV. We thought they were supposed to be miniature dictatorships. That's exactly what Karen was counting on, I replied. Sarah taught everyone to recognize the warning signs of financial fraud, turning my neighbors into a surveillance network that would make the CIA jealous. We created a secure group chat for sharing intelligence and established evidence collection protocols that could hold up in federal court. We're building a case that needs to be bulletproof, Sarah explained, handing out evidence bags and instruction sheets. Everything documented, everything dated, everything defensible in court. Meanwhile, Marcus was working his media contacts. HOA corruption sells papers, especially with this David versus Goliath ranch angle. My friend at the Denver Post is practically salivating for an exclusive. I studied Karen's escalation patterns from 15 years of professional experience with fraudsters. They always follow the same playbook when cornered. First bribery, then intimidation, then desperate sabotage. She's going to try to buy me off next, I predicted. Then she'll threaten me. Finally, she'll do something stupid that lands her in handcuffs. How can you be so sure? Tom asked. Because I've watched this exact sequence 47 times before. Fraudsters are predictable, they can't help themselves. Our strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Let Karen make the next aggressive move while we documented everything. Give her enough rope to hang herself, legally speaking. We had 30 days to gather bulletproof evidence before the next HOA meeting, where we planned to spring our trap in front of the entire community. Criminal referral to the DA, civil lawsuit filing, and media exposure, all coordinated for maximum impact. I looked around at my unlikely team of co-conspirators, a former FBI agent, a predatory attorney, a wise elderly neighbor, and a handful of fed-up residents who'd finally found someone willing to fight back. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my beer bottle in a toast, "let's go catch ourselves a thief." The countdown had begun, and Karen Mitchell had no idea what was coming for her. Week 8 brought Karen's first attempt at buying her way out of trouble, and let me tell you, watching a desperate criminal try to negotiate is like watching someone dig their own grave with a silver spoon. She showed up at my ranch on a Tuesday morning, wearing what probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, designer jeans that had never seen actual work, boots that had never touched dirt, and enough jewelry to fund a small country's infrastructure program. "Jake," she said, using my first name like we were old friends, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I have a proposition that might interest you." I was wearing the wire Marcus had provided, hidden under my work shirt like a technological guardian angel. Every word she spoke was being recorded in high-definition clarity for posterity and prosecution. "I represent an anonymous investor group that's very interested in your property," she continued, pulling out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "We're prepared to offer you $200,000 over market value." I nearly laughed out loud. The anonymous investor group was Karen's own development company, funded by stolen HOA money. "What makes you think I want to sell?" "Look, we both know you don't really want to live here," she said, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "City boy like you? This place is too rustic?" Here's where Karen made her fatal mistake. She'd done research on my divorce settlement, probably illegal research, and thought she could use my financial situation as leverage. "I know you need the money after what your ex-wife took," she said, leaning forward like she was sharing state secrets. "This could solve all your problems." What she didn't know was that Sarah was parked in an unmarked van down the road, recording everything through directional microphones that could pick up a whisper from 50 yards away. When I politely declined her offer, Karen's mask slipped faster than a greased pig at a county fair. "I can make your life very difficult if you refuse this generous offer," she said, all pretense of neighborly concern evaporating like morning dew. "County inspections, environmental violations, tax assessments, there are so many ways things can go wrong for uncooperative residents." That night, her sabotage campaign began in earnest. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of rushing water flooding my back pasture. Someone had, accidentally, damaged my irrigation system with what looked suspiciously like bolt cutters. By morning, Karen had called the county claiming I was operating illegal water rights, violating environmental protection laws, and disrupting the natural flow of waterways. The same woman who'd built a development over protected wetlands was suddenly an environmental activist. She also filed noise complaints about my rooster, the same rooster who'd been greeting the sunrise since before her HOA existed. Apparently, natural farm sounds violated the peaceful enjoyment clauses she'd written into her illegal regulations. But Karen's brother-in-law, County Commissioner Dale Mitchell, decided to make a personal appearance for what he called an informal chat. Picture a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare political parts, receding hairline, expanding waistline, and the kind of smile that made you want to count your fingers after shaking hands. "Jake," he said, settling his considerable bulk onto my porch steps without invitation. "Sometimes the county needs to use eminent domain for the greater community good." I kept my phone recording app running while he explained how property taxes could be reassessed and how environmental violations could trigger mandatory remediation costs that might force a sale. "Cooperation makes everything easier," he said, the threat hanging in the air like smoke from a barn fire. Meanwhile, my team was busy documenting every move they made. Sarah traced the cash flows, proving Karen's investor group was just stolen HOA money laundered through shell companies. We had paper trails that would make Al Capone's accountants weep with envy. Mrs. Chen observed the irrigation sabotage from her kitchen window, getting clear photos of the contractor who'd done the damage. Other neighbors reported Karen asking suspicious questions about my daily routine, when I went to town, what time I came home, whether I had security systems. "She's planning something bigger," Mrs. Chen warned, bringing me a thermos of coffee and a plate of cookies that smelled like heaven. "That woman has the look of someone about to do something very stupid." Karen's social media presence became increasingly unhinged. Her HOA Facebook page turned into a platform for conspiracy theories about dangerous outsiders threatening our way of life, and city people who think they can buy their way into our community and change everything. The mini twist came when she raised HOA fees by $200 per month, claiming emergency security needs to protect against disruptive elements. But she specifically targeted families who'd attended my barbecues, making it clear that loyalty to Queen Karen wasn't optional. Disloyalty has consequences, she announced at an emergency board meeting that felt more like a tribunal than a community discussion. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple while Karen dug her hole deeper with every desperate move. She had no idea that every threat, every bribe attempt, every act of sabotage was adding years to her eventual prison sentence. The beautiful thing about desperate criminals is their complete inability to stop making things worse for themselves. Week 10 brought Karen's final desperate gambit, and it was a doozy. At 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, she called 911, claiming I'd threatened her with a shotgun during what she described as a violent confrontation on my own property. I was feeding my chickens when the sirens started wailing across the valley, getting louder until 2 sheriff's cruisers came roaring up my gravel driveway like they were responding to an active shooter situation. Karen arrived right behind them in her white Escalade, probably breaking several traffic laws to make sure she was there for my arrest. She'd put on a performance that would have made Broadway jealous, mascara strategically smeared, hair artfully disheveled, clutching tissues like they were lifelines. "Officers, thank God you're here," she sobbed, pointing at me like I was holding a weapon instead of a bucket of chicken feed. "He's been stalking and intimidating residents for weeks. This morning he threatened to kill me with a shotgun." The lead deputy, a weathered guy named Rodriguez, who looked like he'd seen every kind of crazy the world had to offer, glanced around my property with the expression of someone trying to find a unicorn in a petting zoo. "Ma'am, where exactly is this shotgun?" he asked. Karen waved dramatically toward my barn. He had it pointed right at me. I barely escaped with my life. Deputy Rodriguez looked at me standing there in work boots and a coffee-stained flannel shirt, holding chicken feed and looking about as threatening as a retirement home activity director. "Sir, do you own any firearms?" "Yes, sir. Grandfather's old hunting rifle, locked in the gun safe inside the house. Haven't fired it in 2 years." That's when I played my ace in the hole. "Officers, I think you'll find the actual situation is quite different. I have everything documented." I handed Rodriguez a USB drive containing our entire investigation, financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage, witness statements, and a timeline proving Karen's systematic fraud and harassment campaign. "Sir, what's your background exactly?" Rodriguez asked, scrolling through the organized evidence folders on his tablet. "Time for the big reveal. I run Revenge Tech Solutions, the largest HOA management company in the country. I've prosecuted this exact fraud pattern in 12 states. The color drained from Karen's face faster than water from a broken dam. For the first time in months, she was completely speechless. "Ms. Mitchell, you might want to stop talking," Rodriguez suggested. "Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Karen couldn't help herself. In the presence of 2 deputies with everything being recorded, she tried to justify her actions like a defendant representing herself in murder court. "Everything I did was for the community's protection," she insisted. "He's a dangerous outsider who doesn't understand our way of life." "Including the missing $180,000, Rodriguez asked, consulting his notes. That's when Karen realized she'd walked into a trap more sophisticated than anything she'd ever imagined. She tried to leave, but Rodriguez had already called for detective backup and a search warrant. Sarah arrived right on cue, looking like she'd stepped out of a federal prosecutor's recruitment poster. "Ms. Mitchell, you're looking at 15 federal fraud charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Within minutes, my ranch looked like the set of a police procedural. Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit, search warrant for Karen's home and HOA office, evidence bags, and enough documentation to choke a federal judge. Mrs. Chin appeared with a tray of iced tea for the officers and what looked suspiciously like popcorn for the neighbors who'd started gathering to watch the show. "About time someone stood up to her," she announced loudly enough for the local news crew that Marcus had mysteriously tipped off to hear clearly. Karen tried to cover her face as the cameras rolled, claiming this was persecution by disgruntled residents and a witch hunt by corrupt law enforcement, but the handcuffs clicking around her wrists made a sound that echoed across the valley like divine justice. The mini twist came when Detective Martinez discovered that Karen had been surveilling not just me, but half the neighborhood. Her home office contained detailed files on every resident who'd ever questioned her authority, complete with financial information, daily routines, and what looked like targeting strategies for forcing people out of their homes. "This isn't just embezzlement," Martinez told Rodriguez. "This is organized conspiracy to defraud an entire community." Brother-in-law County Commissioner Dale Mitchell was already distancing himself publicly, claiming he'd had no knowledge of any irregularities in HOA operations. His political career was about to become as extinct as Karen's freedom. As Karen was loaded into the back of a patrol car, she looked at me through the window with pure hatred, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete, satisfying peace. Justice wasn't just coming, justice had arrived, wearing handcuffs and riding in the back of a sheriff's cruiser. The next stop would be the most public vindication of my life. The Pine Ridge Community Center had never seen anything like it. What was supposed to be an emergency HOA meeting to elect new leadership turned into the legal equivalent of a public execution, complete with standing room-only crowds, local TV news crews, and enough dramatic tension to power a small city. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of 3 times the normal attendance. The buzz of conversation mixed with the hum of camera equipment as reporters from 3 local stations set up their shots. Even neighboring HOAs had sent representatives, probably wondering if their own boards were running similar scams. I pulled up in my work truck, wearing the same ranch clothes I'd been wearing for months, but carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to send Karen away for the next decade. The community erupted in applause as I walked through the door. "There's our hero," Mrs. Chen called out, loud enough for the cameras to catch. The court-appointed HOA monitor, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Williams, called the meeting to order with the efficiency of someone who'd seen enough municipal corruption to stock a Netflix series. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I'm here to explain why your former HOA president was arrested this morning on charges including embezzlement, fraud, extortion, and filing false police reports. The state attorney general considers this the largest HOA fraud case in Colorado history." Several residents gasped audibly. They'd known Karen was difficult, but most had no idea about the scope of her criminal enterprise. "Mr. Morrison has been invited to address the community as the whistleblower who exposed this corruption," Williams continued. I took the podium to another round of applause, camera flashes popping like paparazzi at a movie premiere. For the first time in months, I felt like I could speak freely. "I didn't come back to my family ranch to become a whistleblower," I began. "I just wanted to fix up my grandfather's place and live quietly. But sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, especially when they're stealing from your neighbors." That's when I dropped the bombshell that made the front page of every newspaper in the state. What Karen didn't know when she declared war on me is that I run Revenge Tech Solutions, the largest HOA management company in the country. I've prosecuted 47 similar fraud cases across 23 states. I recognized her tactics because I've sent people to prison for exactly the same crimes. The crowd erupted. This wasn't just a neighbor helping neighbors. This was a professional fraud hunter who'd accidentally wandered into Karen's web. Sarah took the microphone next, presenting our forensic accounting findings with the precision of someone testifying before Congress. Charts, graphs, and spreadsheets that told the story of systematic theft stretching back 5 years. Every family in this community was overcharged an average of $3,200 annually, she announced. Karen Mitchell stole your money to fund her luxury lifestyle and development schemes. Total theft, $427,000 plus interest and damages. The mic drop moment came when I announced my plan for the community's future. "I'm donating my time to restructure this HOA properly," I said. "Transparent financial systems, fair governance procedures, democratic decision-making. No more secret meetings, no more surprise fees, no more Karens." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Grown men were wiping their eyes. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears while applauding so hard I worried about her arthritis. A reporter from Channel 7 asked about broader implications for the HOA industry. "This happens because residents don't know their rights," I replied. "I'm creating a free educational website for HOA members nationwide. Every American deserves to live free from petty tyranny." That's when Karen made her final, desperate appearance. Despite the restraining order, despite being out on bail, despite having every reason to stay away, she stormed into the meeting like a woman possessed. "He's not even a real rancher," she screamed, pointing at me with shaking hands. "This is all fake. He orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against me." Security moved to escort her out as the crowd began booing, but I held up my hand. "Let her speak," I said. "Let everyone see exactly who they've been dealing with." Karen ranted for 30 seconds about persecution, corruption, and city people trying to destroy rural communities. Every word was being recorded for her sentencing hearing. As security finally led her away, her high heels clicking frantically on the linoleum floor, the crowd broke into spontaneous applause. Detective Martinez provided an update on the criminal investigation. Additional charges were expected. The FBI was examining interstate fraud aspects. Karen's brother-in-law was also under investigation for corruption. The community vote was unanimous. Elect Jake Morrison as interim HOA president with a mandate to implement complete governance reform. "All in favor of putting the fox in charge of fixing the hen house?" Mrs. Chen called out. "Ah, yeah!" echoed through the packed room like thunder. Standing before that crowd, no longer hiding my expertise, I felt something I hadn't experienced since returning to the ranch: complete victory. "You don't have to accept corruption as normal," I told them. "Every neighborhood deserves honest leadership." Camera flashes captured the moment as an entire community chose hope over fear, transparency over tyranny, and justice over silence. 6 months later, Pine Ridge looked like a completely different place. What used to be a community living in fear had transformed into something that actually resembled the neighborhood Karen had always claimed to be protecting. The HOA now operated with crystal clear transparency, monthly financial reports posted online, open meetings where residents actually had a voice, and democratic decision-making that would make the founding fathers proud. My ranch had become the unofficial community center, hosting everything from board meetings to birthday parties. "We never knew HOAs could actually work for residents," Tom Peterson told me, helping set up tables for our monthly Good Neighbor potluck in the barn. "We thought they were supposed to be miniature dictatorships." The smell of Mrs. Chen's dumplings mixed with Sarah's tamales and 3 different varieties of homemade pie. As neighbors who'd been afraid to talk to each other for years shared stories and recipes. Veterans like Mr. Peterson found their voices again. Single mom Lisa discovered a support network she never knew existed. Karen's legal consequences were as satisfying as a perfect sunset over the Rockies. 4 years in federal prison for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. $850,000 in restitution and fines. Her brother-in-law, county commissioner, got 2 years and removal from office. Every stolen dollar was recovered and returned to residents plus interest. Some families got checks for over $5,000, money that had been theirs all along. My personal life found the peace I'd been searching for when I first came back to the ranch. Turns out I didn't have to choose between country life and my professional mission. Sarah and I discovered that fighting corruption together was surprisingly romantic, and our wedding in the barn became the social event of the year. Who knew takedowns could be so romantic? She laughed during our first dance, while the whole community celebrated around us. Mrs. Chen appointed herself honorary grandmother to everyone under 40, dispensing wisdom and homemade cookies with equal generosity. The story went viral in ways I never expected. 60 Minutes, Netflix documentary, congressional testimony about HOA reform. What started as one man defending his grandfather's ranch became a national conversation about protecting communities from petty tyrants. The Morrison method became the standard protocol for detecting HOA fraud, taught in law schools and used by prosecutors nationwide. 12 states passed stronger HOA oversight laws inspired by our case. But the real victory was the Pine Ridge Community Fund we established using the lawsuit settlement money. The scholarship program has sent 15 rural kids to college so far, education as the ultimate revenge against ignorance. We protected 500 acres of mountain wilderness from development, ensuring that future generations will see the same sunsets that inspired my grandfather. Our annual HOA Reform Day Festival brings together reformed communities from across the country. This year we had over 500 attendees, sharing war stories, comparing notes, and celebrating the power of neighbors who refuse to be bullied. Revenge Tech Solutions became the leading HOA reform organization in America, helping expose corruption in over 200 communities nationwide. Turns out there are a lot of Karens out there, but there are even more people willing to fight back once they learn how. Americans shouldn't fear coming home, I told Congress during my testimony on HOA reform legislation. My book, Fighting HOA Tyranny, A Rancher's Guide to Justice, became a bestseller and apparently required reading for anyone dealing with neighborhood dictators. Last week, I got a call that reminded me why this fight never really ends. "You don't know me," the voice said, "but I heard about what you did in Colorado. I'm calling from Florida, and I think you need to hear my story." The woman on the phone described an HOA president running an illegal vacation rental empire, using resident fees to fund personal real estate investments and targeting elderly homeowners who couldn't fight back. "Tell me everything," I said, already reaching for my notepad, and I mean everything. Because here's what I've learned. Bullies count on you staying quiet. They depend on your fear, your isolation, your belief that fighting back is hopeless. But sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be silent. Our annual barbecue festival just finished, with over 500 people celebrating on the same land Karen tried to steal. Children played where she wanted to build condos, families laughed where she planned golf courses. Mrs. Chen's vegetable garden thrived where luxury homes were supposed to stand. Remember, every neighborhood needs someone willing to fight back. Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story. You might be featured in my next investigation. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because the fight for honest communities continues and every victory makes the next one easier. The sun sets over the mountains every evening, just like it did for my grandfather, just like it will for generations to come. And in Pine Ridge, at least, freedom rings louder than any HOA gavel ever could.